Yeah, I kind of hit the nail on the head. But continue what you were saying. I mean, yeah, they died fighting the wrong enemy. And George's Patton, what he wanted to do is he wanted to utilize the spirit of the Germans, at least on the West, to use against the East. And we've talked about this. I mean, the greater enemy is from within. It's not these other powers. But back then, I mean, that's what it was. And I honestly I think that was a great idea. But here's the thing: had they succeeded and defeated them and invaded them and won, it wouldn't have really changed much. We would still have what we have today. But what I am getting at is George S. Patton wanted to weaponize these people and their fanaticism and use it against their opposition and their enemies. He wanted to take their ideas, all the good ideas, and use it. He wanted to get all the fanatics, all the high IQ guys, kind of like Operation Paperclip, but on a military level, and like use it for the American military and weaponize it against the Soviets, later on when they're ready for that war.
Hmm.
But I was like, oh no, we can't do that. They're too radical. This they need to be punished. We need to, do Nuremberg,
Right.
and we need to like westernize them, give them
Yeah.
M1 helmets, give them American uniforms in gray, and just call it a day. And that's why you look at the West and the East, and the East German um, Republic was far more nationalistic. It was far more cultural. It was far more greater than what they had in Western Germany. And I have a boomer friend who was alive and living, and he can even testify this was much the case. And this was also the case in North and South Korea, where North Korea was not only is it culturally to this day better than South Korea, but they were economically far better than South Korea for a number of years. Again, this is because they weren't westernized and subverted in culture. Um, they were influenced by their own nationalization. When the Soviets took over East Germany and Poland and many of these nations, they said, keep your culture, keep your ideas, because when they tried to implement their own culture, Stalin realized their culture, their nation is dying at the expense of their own values, so they're better off keeping and maintaining these values. This is also because in the Soviet Union didn't really persecute anyone from the Third Reich or any other regime that was of that allegiance after winning World War II. They kept a lot of these figures in power and told them to keep doing what they're doing for their nations. As a matter of fact, I think Stalin, they imprisoned a bunch of Russian nationalists and imperialists. Well, during World War II, he brought them out of prison to nationalize, help him with nationalizing the Soviet Union. And that's why when you look at the Soviet Union today, and as a matter of fact, Eastern socialism as a whole today, you see a lot of nationalism because of these actions. And this is why when you look at Russia today and the songs and the music and the patriotism, it stems from these actions. And Stalin as a whole made the communist aesthetic a lot more appealing because of this. But the point that I'm getting at is compared East and West Germany. Eastern Germany, they maintained the Prussian goose step, they maintained the Prussian drill, they maintained all the Prussian traditions. In fact, a lot of their music and culture that's well preserved, it is because of the Volksarmy that this is the case. They even utilized, they have that really weird alien Stahlhelm. That Stahlhelm was actually a prototype that was used by the Wehrmacht, and they carried that tradition onwards through the Volksarmy. This was in Eastern countries.
Wow.
What did the Western Bundeswehr do? Well, I mean, their marching was Americanized, their helmets were Americanized, their weapons were Americanized, their tanks the first 30 years were Americanized, their culture was Americanized. I mean, the popular songs in Western Germany and the popular songs in Eastern Germany, okay, have a very radical difference. Why is the case? Because Eastern Germany's culture was preserved. It remained German. It remained nationalized. The Western German culture was Americanized. This is also why in Western Europe, okay, the nations are so cucked. But you look at Hungary, you look at Poland, and on a smaller degree, Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania. Okay, these countries aren't as cucked. Poland and Hungary, especially, are very based because these were countries um, that were overseen by the Warsaw Pact. So, you know, I know I'm kind of shilling out for our socialist enemies, of course, but we're talking about culture here. We're not talking about ideology. We're not
Right.
talking about the genocides or what crimes these regimes have committed. We're talking about the culture and the people and the happiness and the quality of life. They live better quality of lives despite the fact that economically in most of these countries they were far less off. I mean, look at the, Arabia, or not Arabia, the Middle East. Okay, they live in freaking mutt huts, but they're happy. A lot of them that are active in the service and when that fight for this beliefs, they're happy because they're fighting and dying for a cause that they actually believe in. And it is the same exact case in the Eastern nations during the Cold War and up to this point in most of former Eastern Pact nations, such as Russia and China. It's because they actually have a cause and a culture that they are fighting and will eventually die for on the battlefield. At least they believe so. The West does not have that, and we will not have that under this government or under this society unless we are able to get a leader that is charismatic and has the authority to deliver these directives in place immediately. Okay, not through slow progress, not through the Congress immediately. It has to be a directive where he gets into power, he establishes his directives, and immediately it's just in full force motion. Full force motion. Everything is enacted. The staff is in full force. The entire military is in lockstep behind this. The entire party is in lockstep behind this. And immediately we're this great American empire that has a Christian moral framework and foundation. That's what we need because that's exactly what the East has already done. But we could do it on a greater scale if we wanted to. We have the resources to do that. The East does not. Unfortunately, the debate isn't East versus West because at this point, the East has better cultural values than the West. The debate now is how do we get the West to work off of to get to the level of culture that the East is, because right now we're just absolutely screwed. But yeah, like I said, look at East and West Germany. Look at North and South Korea in the 70s and 80s. Look at these nations. And in some of these nations, even the economy at some points were far better. But the reason why in North Korea the economy has dwindled is because of sanctions. It's because the entire West is against this small little nation, and they don't have the capacity to pump out the resources required. And that's why they're struggling so badly right now. But culturally, they will always remain far superior. As a matter of fact, look at the politics in Germany today. East and West Germany. Eastern Germany is far more conservative. Western Germany is far more liberal statistically. Why is that the case? Because culturally, they were literally, programmed to. It's just a totally different culture. I don't really need to go very far in explaining this. I already kind of explained this. Eastern Germany, the way they were brought up under the Warsaw Pact, has framed them into a more conservative country. And this is a hard pill to swallow. Even Francoist Spain struggled to do this because Francoist Spain wasn't authoritarian enough. They were a lot more lenient, and they gave it over to the monarchy immediately. If Franco was a lot more totalitarian, and if he was able to be more harsh on the indoctrination and ensure that the values were installed in everyone, not just the Catholics, not just the right wing, not just those who believed in the cause, but everyone in Spain in lockstep behind this and ensured it may remain that way for dozens and dozens of years afterwards, they would still retain those beliefs. But because they were lenient, because he was like, I want to be humble, I want to be the good guy here and do the right thing, and I respect him for that, for giving me over back to the monarchy, but because he was too generous and gave them this ground. Spain is the gayest country, literally the gayest country in Europe right now.
Mallorca, right? That one hotspot has the most gays. It's where monkeypox is big currently. It's huge there.
Yeah.
You're right. The Iron Curtain Act is as a protector for Eastern Europe. It's like a perfect rift you can find along the border countries where West, Central, and meets Eastern. It's the Iron Curtain right there. And it's funny because you mentioned what happened with the military, but what the Americans did too, and they implemented the Morgenthau Marshall and then the Marshall Plan, was along with the rebuilding of buildings, which was fine, they messed with the people. They got rid of their cultural music, their Wagner, and they replaced it with Schoenberg, atonal music, which sounds like trash. It literally sounds like bats from hell screeching on violins. Yeah. It sucks. You want to know what else they did? They handed out pornography, tons of it, like candy bookstores, like that kind of thing, to people in the streets wherever they went. And that just bore the people down, right? And then drugs became popular there. Tons of drugs. And then birth control, right? Whereas you had the big births of the 30s, now you had the Darth and the no births of the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And that's what starts implementing the Turks. That's what starts
Yeah.
implementing the Turks, to come in there as what they call a temporary labor force, which is going to make up for the temporary loss of babies and workmen and working men in the workforce. That's what's going to happen. And so the West of Germany is just a perfect petri dish of what happens when Jews want to take vengeance out on your nation. And that's just what it is. With pornography, with rock and roll. I love me some good rhythm sections. Trust me, guys. But the sexualized rock and roll of the 60s and 70s tore Germany apart with the leather.